What's up, everybody? This is the Booch, and welcome to episode 46 of the Boochcast Reviews, Darkside of the Ring. And as you can see, I'm riding solo for this episode because the topic we're going to get into this week is one that apparently was so twisted, nobody else on the show wanted to take this ride with me. I had some people with me for the other episodes. We all got together, we all had a blast, and now they all kind of decided, you know what, Booch, we're going to sit this one out. You can handle this. You take this. This is all you. And I'm like, okay. So we're getting into it this week. Chris Colt, welcome to my nightmare. Now, I'm going to say before we get into this that I've said this many times before, and I'll say it again. One thing I love about the show, Darkside of the Ring, is the fact that even someone like me who watches wrestling, studies wrestling, researches wrestling, understands the business inside and out, even I can learn something brand new from Darkside of the Ring. Like I said, there are stories that I've never heard of. There are wrestlers that I never heard of. And I can honestly say, Chris Colt is somebody I have never heard of this person a day in my life. And apparently, according to this documentary, neither has anyone else. So with that said, let's get it started. He was considered the best wrestler that no one ever saw. He loved pain. He was a psychopath, a sadist, and a masochist. He was a Hell's Angel, a Comanchero, a space oddity, and the original rock and roll wrestler. So apparently, before rock and roll and wrestling came together in the 80s, Chris Colt had the original rock and roll gimmick. Chris Colt tore up the territories in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, thrilling audiences with unhinged performances and outlandish characters. And I can tell you right now, that dude was outlandish as a motherfucker, and I can't wait to talk about it. A talented performer, Chris Colt's in-ring antics mirrored his volatility outside of the squared circle. He was a madman and an outlaw who did what you didn't want him to do, and he was happier doing it his way. Which, I understand the 60s is a great way to live your life, or that was the attitude, but when you live a lifestyle like that, it's only a matter of time before it fucks you up. It's fun for a little while, but it has no long-term effects. But beneath his psychedelic appearance, a darkness lurked, and Chris's obsession with death was no act. When he was a kid, people threw rocks at him and called him a queer. He said, small towns can be so weird and cruel. And sadly back then, that's true. Because, you find out through all of this that Chris Colt is, some say he's gay, some say he's bisexual, whichever side you want to go with. He definitely seemed more gay than bisexual. But yeah, small towns back then were cruel because everybody has small town attitudes. Everybody has a small town mindset. Even though for the most part, they, as the Jason Aldean song says, round here we take care of our own. Sometimes you get some rare small towns where that doesn't happen. Because when you're gay back then, it was heavily frowned upon. It's not like today. So, I can only imagine the hell that he went through. Driven by demons and obsessed with death, he became a cult icon and a legend. But who was Chris Colt? And that's the thing. That's the question that they try to answer in this episode. But I don't know if we'll ever get the answer or if they ever really showed the answer. But I guess we'll find out together. But either way, Chris Colt, he was a mystery wrapped up in an enigma. I think that's the best way I can describe it. His favorite saying was, hey man, I'm a homosexual. I'm a drug addict and I'm an alcoholic. And I'll match you scar for scar and you'll look like a fucking virgin. Damn. I can honestly say that is the most badass saying I've ever heard in my life. You almost forget the part where he opens up with, I'm a homosexual. Chris Colt stood out from the average wrestler because he wasn't just a rock star. He was the most over-the-top, strung-out rock star that he could possibly be. He was overboard in every facet of his life. He wanted to have the most sex and take the most drugs, drink the most booze. He wanted to be the best. He was the guy that was like more about the party than about the sport or the art. It's like musicians that are more concerned with taking drugs than making music, or more concerned with doing drugs than telling jokes, or doing drugs rather than playing sports. Like, there's that party aspect that usually takes over a lot of famous people. They become more about the party than about the work, and the party starts to suffer the work. One time he gets booked in a cage match in Phoenix, Arizona on May 9th, 1975. Now, originally, a cage match in the territories was actually meant to keep the wrestlers in. No way in, no way out, we're going to settle this. And that's true. In fact, if you listen to the Boochcast, the podcast version, Gator and I have had this discussion before, where in the territory days, and even on the indies, the cage match was supposed to be the blow-off. That's the final match in a program. If you get to a point where you're in the cage is supposed to settle everything. And the only way to win a cage match was by pinfall or submission. Escaping the cage was not an option until later on. Like in the WWE, WCW days, when, right around the 90s, I think, I want to say the 90s, is when they started making escaping the cage an option. Now, Gator believes that you should never escape the cage at all. I sort of disagree with that. To me, it depends on what's going to happen with the rivalry. If the cage match is going to be the final match to settle everything, then no, you should not escape the cage to win. You should pin or submit your opponent in the middle of the ring. But if you're going to have a rivalry continue after a cage match, like if after the cage match, there's going to be another match after that, then I believe it's okay to have someone climb out of the cage and have both feet hit the ground outside to win the match. Because then you can say, yeah, you escaped the cage, but you didn't beat me. You didn't pin me. You climbed out of the cage and you ran like a coward. Now get in this ring and fight me like a man. That's what I would do. That's how I would settle things. If I want to continue a rivalry past the cage, then escape is a good option. But if you want the cage match to end it, it should be pinfall. You can't have someone escape the cage and then end the feud, because that's a shitty ending. But you also can't pin someone inside of a cage and then expect us to give a shit about the next match you plan on booking, because you pretty much killed it. But on this night, Chris Colt took LSD before he got in the cage. At first, the match goes well, but then Chris starts imagining that there are giant spiders coming over the cage to get him. He freaks out and climbs out of the cage and starts punching fans. The fans retaliate, but Chris feels none of it. Bill Anderson comes out with a chair to block the beer bottles being thrown at Chris. Cops start arriving, pepper spraying and handcuffing people. Bill sees all this and goes, what the hell have I gotten myself into? So he took LSD before he got in the ring. Yeah, never fucking do that. So now he starts freaking out because he sees spiders everywhere, which is fucking hilarious. And Bill Anderson, his in-ring name was Bill Colt, and he was Chris's tag team partner. And when they met, he was 18, he drank maybe 2 beers in his whole life, and he just wanted to be a pro wrestler. He was one of those guys that just wanted to be a wrestler. He didn't want to party, he didn't want to drink or do drugs, he just wanted to wrestle and get paid. And to be honest, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not a bad way to live your life, especially if you can make a living doing it. Chris was a massive partier in the 60s, during a time when wrestlers were more old-fashioned. He spent time with Janis Joplin and worked as a roadie for Joe Cocker. So, yeah, in the 60s, there was 2 types of people that existed. You had the hippie, make love, not war, party people, and you had the conservative, suit and tie, elegant dress-wearing people. There was no in-between. You had extremists on both sides. Eventually, he started writing a book, and they show us excerpts from the book throughout this episode. So throughout the episode, you hear people reading his book and talking about stuff. I can't tell if the voiceover, I don't know who it is. It's not Chris Jericho, it's somebody else. But I don't think it's Chris Colt's voice because he's obviously dead. But we hear different excerpts from the book. So this first one says, I was bored in Phoenix one weekend and decided I wanted to go to San Francisco for the first time because it was always a dream of mine. All the freedom of the 60s. People getting high, having open sex on bars, streets, it was all open. One night I was walking down Market Street. I noticed a girl sitting on some steps, looking lonely, chugging a gallon of wine. I gave her a quick look, said hi, and kept walking. She responded with, hey, want to have a drink? I turned and I said, sure. She just smiled. Beyond her smile, I saw sincere, deep eyes, but I also saw tragedy and hurt and pain. Because that was the 60s, ladies and gentlemen. People were getting high and nobody cared. People were having sex out in the open. Nobody cared. Things were a lot looser back then during the hippie era, especially 1967, which I believe was the summer of love. You could literally walk through Central Park in New York and just see hippies fucking all over the park. You know, it was all about make love, not war, and having all this fun stuff, because back then there were no venereal diseases. AIDS and HIV didn't exist yet. It wasn't an issue. So everybody was just being promiscuous and having sex without protection and experimenting with drugs. Because back then there weren't really too many consequences to your actions for that. There was some, but not as extreme as it would become later. He later stopped at a head shop and saw a poster and realized the woman he was talking to was Janis Joplin. He went back to the bar and said, "Why didn't you say it was you?" She said, "I didn't want somebody who was a beggar, a hanger-on, or just wanted to be around me because I'm talented." He gave her a hug and said, "Janis, I will always be your friend." And then they hung out and got high together on occasion. Now, obviously, most of you know who Janis Joplin is, but just in case there's anyone watching who doesn't know, Janis Joplin was an American singer and songwriter, one of the most successful and widely known rock performers of her era. She was noted for her powerful mezzo-soprano vocals, as well as her electric stage presence. Her most popular songs were "Piece of My Heart," "Cry Baby," "Down on Me," "Ball and Chain," "Summertime." Those were cover songs. And her original song, "Mercedes-Benz," which was her final recording. She also performed at Woodstock, the 1969 original one. In 1995, she went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She's ranked number 46 in the top 100 greatest artists of all time. Janis Joplin's a legend in rock and roll and one of the all-time greats. So the fact that he got to hang out with Janis Joplin is really fucking cool. Another excerpt from the book says, "I styled myself as a male Janis Joplin in the ring. Jewelry, chains, clothes, and attitude. She left everything on the stage, so he left everything in the ring. She lived in the moment and didn't care about the future, and he did the same. He also planned on being dead by 27, just like Janis Joplin, living fast and dying young." Because she did die from a heroin overdose at the age of 27. And a lot of rock and roll stars like Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and a variety of others, they all died in their late 20s. I mean, I can only imagine what their lives would have been like if they had lived to be 40 or whatever. But, you know, they were all about living fast and dying young. That was their lifestyles. That's all they thought about was, you got one goal around the track in life and we're going to make the best of it and we're going to party. And they just wanted to live life back then. That's all they cared about. They didn't care about making it to 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 or 80. They just wanted to have a good time. And if it ended, it ended. Born Charles Fay Harris in Idaho in 1946 and raised in the small town of Drain, Oregon, Chris's chaotic upbringing set the tone for the rest of his life. Monday through Friday was like a normal, loving home, and the weekend drinking is when everything blew up. So basically, Monday through Friday, he lived in a normal, nice home, and it was on the weekend when all the drama and the fights would take place. So that was pretty much his life. His parents drank a lot, and on the weekends, they would stop and get a case of half gallons of whiskey. They would get drunk, have brawls, the kids were all involved, and it got really brutal. When he was 10, he came home from a friend's house one Saturday. Everything was destroyed in the house. All the dishes were broke, and his mom was sitting around the couch with a bloody face. And there was a gun sitting next to her that her husband had hit her in the face with and split the handle of the gun. It was a wooden handle. And I'm glad that they specified it was a wooden handle. Because I'm thinking to myself, how hard is his mom's face? Or how strong is that guy to take a gun and split the handle by bashing someone in the face with it? But then they said it's a wooden handle. I'm like, okay, then I can see that splitting. That makes sense. Chris explains in his book, "I thought she was dead. She was flowing with blood. Blood out of her nose, mouth, and ears. We put her in the backseat of the car, a 56 Chevy, trying to hide her. He hadn't had enough of her yet. He was a raving maniac. I screamed, 'I wish you were dead, you bastard.' And he hit me. Broke my eardrum. He grabbed another gun and started firing it at us. Sis was now behind the wheel, successfully driving down an old dirt road, making our escape to the highway." Okay. No disrespect to my good friend Buff Bagwell, but this gun story kicks the shit out of his gun story. I'm sorry, but it does. This is definitely some crazy shit. Just when I thought Buff had the craziest gun story where he shot his dad, Chris comes back with a crazy story where his dad beat his mother with a handle of a gun and then tried to kill all of them as they drove off. Chris and his mom would drive to Roseburg to watch wrestling shows. He fell in love with it, and it was all he ever wanted to do. So this is how he got into the business. He goes to watch wrestling shows in the local town, and like most people, he falls in love with it, so that's what he wanted to do. Now in his book, he said, one day in high school, Drain High, we were having orientation class, and the question came up, what are we going to do with our lives? My turn came, and I said, professional wrestler. The class laughed. It hurt me. And I get it. You know, Steve Harvey told a similar story where he said, I want to be on TV. And the teacher crushed him. You know, and people laugh when they say something like that. Like, I'm going to be a professional wrestler. I'm going to be an athlete. I'm going to be a comedian. I'm going to be a musician. Everybody laughs because they know how hard it is to make it in that business. And plus look at you and go like, you can't be a wrestler. Look at your size. Look at your body. You can't be a musician. You can't sing. You can't be a comedian. You're not funny. Like they say shit like that to you and try to crush your dreams. And it is crushing to you. Because when you open up to somebody and say, this is what I really want to be, and they bash it, that's you being vulnerable and opening up. So it can crush you. And the more you get crushed, the harder it is for you to open up to other people in the future. So I can understand the pain that he's going through a little bit. And I can understand why it hurts him so much to talk about these things. I said I wanted to be a pro wrestler. Everybody laughed at me. And obviously I never became a pro wrestler, but I got into the wrestling business another way. But, you know, as a comedian, some people thought I was crazy for doing that. And I ended up, you know, doing some cool shit in my career, you know, and he ended up becoming somewhat successful in wrestling. So they'll laugh at you now, but they'll want your autograph later. And trust me, you'll be the guy that they'll say, hey, I went to school with him. So they'll brag about you later. He tried out for the wrestling team and made it. He decided he needed to stand out a little bit and bleached his hair blonde. They kicked him off the team and out of the school. And kids threw rocks at him. Okay. Apparently bleaching your hair blonde was considered a negative back then. I don't think that's a reason to kick somebody off the team and kick them out of school. Who cares if he has blonde hair? He's white. What, white kid can't have blonde hair? What is that, strictly a woman thing? I got news for you. There are guys out there who have blonde hair. Not everyone bleaches it, but blonde hair on a guy is normal, especially if the dude is white. So I fail to see the issue here. Even in the 60s, I can't see how that was a problem. But again, small town, sometimes they do stupid shit. He jumps on a bus and goes out to Chicago. He walks into a wrestling school and says, hey, I want to do this. Back then, wrestling schools didn't do open invitations. Also, it cost money to train. So he became a male prostitute to earn some money. Yeah, Elvis once said before, how far are you willing to go to pursue your dreams? He said that during the earthquake episode. Yeah, Chris Colt was not only willing to go from Idaho to Chicago, he was willing to become a male prostitute to earn enough money to pay for wrestling school. So he would work as a male prostitute, basically sucking dick and taking up the ass for money, or fucking in the ass for money. In his book, he says, now remember, I never had a sexual relationship with anyone, but I had heavy bisexual feelings. I was more attracted to men than women. I wanted one thing, to be a professional wrestler. So with nothing to lose, I hit the streets for the first time in my life. I was scared, but it was survival. And again, you know, it's like that whole R&B hip-hop song, you know. What would you do if your son was at home, crying all alone on the bedroom floor because he's hungry? And the only way to feed him is to sleep with a man for a little bit of money. Now his daddy's gone, so we're smoking rock now, in and out of lockdown. I ain't got a job now. So for you, this is just a good time, but for me, this is what I call life. For him, that's what he called life. He was out there surviving the only way he knew how. And it is possible to be bisexual and feel more of an attraction towards men than women. And for those of you who remember Jerry Truman, he was a prime example of that. Jerry Truman's a bisexual. He's had sex with men. He has sex with women. He prefers the trans community. That's his fetish. That's his thing. But he did sleep with men more often than women. And one day I asked him about that. And his real answer was, he said, because with men, there's less drama. He said, with women, you got to take them out to dinner, go to a movie, and jump through all these hoops to get some pussy. Meanwhile, he can go to a gay bar and say, how you doing? Pretty good. Want to have sex? Okay. Boom. That was it. Next thing you know, Jerry's in the bathroom, either fucking or getting fucked. One of the two. So far, everything here is making sense to me. It's a crazy life, but it's making sense. Finding his way in Chicago, training by day and hustling by night, Charles Harris begins his wrestling career with a variety of ring names. Maurice Chevere, the Magnificent Chevere, and finally, Chris Colt. He got the name Colt from Colt Magazine, which was one of the early underground gay publications. They didn't mention where he got the Chris from, but that's where he got the name Colt, from an underground gay magazine that, obviously had to be underground because they wouldn't sell those in magazine stores because back then homosexuality was still very much frowned upon in America. Chris used to say one of the advantages of being gay was that it disqualified him from getting drafted into Vietnam. Also, there were a lot of wrestlers who were gay, but the fans didn't know about it, but the promoters and some of the boys did. In fact, they had this one lady, Princess Victoria, the boys wanted to put him with Chris to try and turn him straight. Because sometimes people think you're gay because you just haven't had any good pussy, or you've never fucked a girl before. And if you got some pussy, you realize how great pussy is, and you wouldn't be gay anymore. And that's not the case. People who are gay don't find women attractive at all. In order to be considered gay, like 100% gay as a man, you have to be able to look at a naked woman and have it not turn you on at all. But you look at a naked guy and you're harder than Chinese algebra. That's a real gay man. If you're a man and you find women attractive, you're not gay. You might be bi, but you're definitely not gay. You can't be full-fledged gay as a man and find women attractive. You can't be straight as a man and find men sexually attractive. You might say someone's good looking in like a platonic way, but you can't be sexually attracted to the same sex and say you're straight. Doesn't work. It's not that he hasn't gotten good quality pussy. It's just that he's gay. And it kept him out of Vietnam, which is good. He was able to avoid the draft without having to run to Canada. Chris felt everyone was out to get him, which resulted in being in and out of multiple territories. He'd either have a personal issue or just something would happen and he'd be gone. So he never stayed in a territory for too long, which hurt his wrestling career. Because if don't stay in a territory long enough, it's hard to get over. So because he was so paranoid, it became a problem. And I said, there's a lot of guys in the business who nobody knew was gay, except for maybe a handful of people like the boys or whatever. Like Pat Patterson was gay. For a long time, nobody knew. Chris Colt was gay. Not a lot of people knew till way later. Because I think Chris Kanyon, who we talked about before on Darkside, was the first openly gay man in wrestling. He was the first one to come out of the closet and tell people, hey, I'm gay. Everybody else was just gay and kept it on the down low. The only place he stayed for any significant portion of his career was a small territory in Arizona. In Arizona, Chris teams with wrestler Ron Dupree and takes the ring name Paul Dupree, tag teaming as the Dupree Brothers. It's a formative relationship in Chris's life professionally and personally. They became best friends and lovers. So Ron ended up being not only his tag team partner for a long time, but his lover for even longer. Later on, they would rename themselves the California Hells Angels. It allowed them to have a gimmick as a team and bring real life into their persona, like wearing metal and studs and an iron cross and leather. They were so far ahead of their time, nobody knew what the fuck it was. They used to say, okay, they're bikers. But the truth is, they wore that stuff because they were gay. Cornette says, same Taylor. And that's what's interesting. Because nowadays you see a lot of gay guys who have that biker look. You can't tell unless you really look at somebody. All right, is he gay or is he a biker? Because those are the only type of people that really wear leather as men. Motorcycle guys or the gays, they would wear them. And nowadays you see gay men dressed like that all the time. Back then, gay men didn't wear those. Or if they did, it was in private. Because like I said, not a lot of gay people came out publicly in the 60s saying they were gay. Because they didn't want to get beat up and they didn't want to get fired from their jobs if they had jobs. So, they had to keep everything quiet. Pushing the limits of what's acceptable to audiences of the era, Chris is determined to become the ultimate villain. Chris was good at getting heat. However, in those days, if you pushed the envelope, you either drew money because people would be shocked and surprised by your actions, or you can go too far and the company could go under. So you have to be very careful with how you get your heat. That's why they have the cheap heat, which is like making fun of hometown sports teams and everything else. And then they have the major heat, which is like insulting someone's mother or hitting them with a steel chair or blinding them, doing degrading shit. Chris once took an American flag and a lighter and lit it on fire and burned it up. He went too far and the entire wrestling program got kicked off of TV for it. Even back then, it was considered too far. Now, just to be clear, Chris was not anti-American. It's not like today where people disrespect the flag because they hate America, even though they live in this country and enjoy all its perks, or at least the ones that we still have before Biden takes fucking all of them away. He wasn't anti-American. He was doing it as a wrestling heel to get heat. Chris was proud to be an American, but he also knew that if he burned the flag, it would piss people off. Because even today, you fuck with the American flag, people will beat your ass. That's why they don't like people who step on the flag or burn the flag or spit on the flag or don't stand during the national anthem. Shit like that. That's a quick way to anger people in this country, is to disrespect the flag. Especially good old boys. They don't play that shit. But Chris was just doing it to get heat, not to make some kind of political statement. But either way, the whole show got kicked off the air. Chris's time in Arizona comes to an abrupt end when his lover Ron Dupree suffers a heart attack. Though Ron can no longer wrestle, the two continue their relationship outside of the ring. As Chris searches for a new tag team partner, he ends up in a trio with Bill Anderson and Mike Boyette. The plan was for Bill to be Bill Colt and be the valet for him and Mike. So Bill's going to be the valet, and Mike and Chris were going to be the tag team because they were the badasses and Bill was on the smaller side of things, so he looked better as a manager. He uses this time to create his rock star gimmick and realizes that Mike is just as much of a partier as he is. One night they leave Johnson City. Bill is driving, Mike is in the passenger seat, and Chris is in the back seat getting high. All of a sudden he punches Bill in the side of the head. Bill asks, "What the hell are you doing?" And Chris says, "Fuck you." He then grabs Mike's hair and pulls him into the back seat. He then tries to pull Bill into the back seat as well, and Mike yells, "Stop the car, stop the car." Chris gets out of the car and punches Bill in the face. He then walks over to Mike and does the same thing. Mike gets out and says, "This is your warning. One more time and I'll kill you." Chris swings, Mike blocks it, and hooks him in a front face lock. Where have we heard this before? And just cinched on it, and Chris goes limp. Mike drops him and gets back in the car and tells Bill to back up. He does, and Mike puts the car in drive, slams on Bill's foot on the gas pedal and says, "We're killing this motherfucker right now." Now, Mike was a Vietnam vet and a world judo champion, so he didn't take any bullshit. Like, again, this is what happens when you mess with grown folk. Now, granted, Mike is taking this to a more extreme level, but in the beginning, he was doing what grown men do. Just like when Punk front face locked Jack Perry. Here he is doing the same thing. Why? Because Chris decided to fuck around and find out. Now, obviously, he doesn't know to get run over for this. As far as I'm concerned, once Chris went limp, that's all Mike had to do. Now, if you want to leave him there, leave him there. But there was no reason to run him over. Chris Colt's erratic and violent behavior comes to a head as he's tossed onto a highway and stares down a car speeding in his direction. The headlights get brighter and brighter and brighter on Chris's body. And at the last second, he hits Mike's arm to the side and turns the wheel. Bill says, "Mike, we can't kill this guy. We can't kill him. We can't do this." Mike says, "That motherfucker deserved to die. Fuck him. Leave him. Leave him." Because Bill didn't want to do this because Bill didn't want to go to fucking jail for first-degree murder. So the fact that he was able to, at the last second, avoid Chris was great and got out of the situation. Bill Anderson and Mike Boyette leave Chris for dead on the side of a southern road. But the next day, when Bill makes his way home to his Nashville apartment, a surprise is waiting for him. Chris is sitting at the dining room table and has a big smile on his face. He tells Bill to sit down and says, "We're getting rid of Boyette." And just like that, he was no longer part of the trio. They go to Seattle to wrestle as a tag team. Bill gets off the plane, sees Chris sitting at the bar, and comes to the realization he can't do this anymore and leaves. That's his last visual of Chris. So that's the last time Bill saw Chris. He just said, "I can't do this anymore," and he left. "I'm done with this." And when you're a professional wrestler and you're living your dream, that's probably the hardest decision you could possibly make at that point, is to honestly say, "I can't do this anymore," when you know that it's causing you more harm than good. Now, obviously, he's not quitting the business. He's just quitting this tag team, which could be a risk to his career, depending on how connected Chris is. But, sometimes you got to walk away from something toxic. I did that in the business. I had to walk away from a toxic promoter, Voldemort. As much as I love being in the business, I couldn't be around him anymore. Now, I want to work for other promotions that don't involve that guy, so I should be okay there. But ultimately, it's a decision you got to make for yourself. If some don't feel right, get out. because even if you enjoy certain parts of it, the overall toxic relationship will kill you. Not long after his partnership with Bill Anderson ends, Chris's attempt to get his career restarted is stopped when he suffers an unimaginable tragedy. Ron Dupree, while ring announcing a small show in Tacoma, Washington, suffers another heart attack. Ron is rushed to the hospital and dies on the way. Chris was in the ambulance with him, was holding his hand and weeping. Chris was devastated and wasn't sure how to live without him. So now Chris is even more emotionally fucked up than he already was. If he wasn't fucked up before, he sure as shit is now, because he just lost the love of his life. In his book, he says, after losing my love of 6 years, I hit rock bottom, I thought. The bottom under the bottom came later. More dope was yet to come. More fixes were to be made. More hearts were to be broken. Mainly mine. He changed his name to the Chris Colt Experience. He uses Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare as his entrance music. He became a pioneer for modern entrance music in wrestling. He saw the tie-in it could have with the fans to set a tone. It had a pitch black, dark, psychedelic edge to it because that's where he was in his mind space. So Chris Colt was one of the first guys to use modern day music in his entrance theme. He became a pioneer for that type of style, which obviously was very successful and very helpful in a lot of areas for a lot of people today who use modern day music like Cult of Personality or Kingdom or other bands to come into wrestling that would be there later, or other singers or musicians. He was so bizarre, he got banned in England from wrestling on TV. They called him the Vampire. He would put needles in his face and he looked like something out of a horror movie. Some also say he looked like a possessed demon. And if you've seen photos of Chris Colt, he definitely looks like a fucking demon. This guy is clearly fucking insane and not right in the head. Now, he might be over dramatizing some of it for the gimmick, but you can also tell he's going through some shit, especially with his lover dying. Chris's erratic behavior and appetite for drugs are both widely out of control. Depending on where he was either pale as a ghost, gained some weight, or could barely stand up straight. Promoters got worried that he might no-show, and if he does show up, what condition will he be in? And that's the thing, when you start becoming a liability in the business, and you start affecting the bottom dollar of promoters, that's when promoters will stop fucking with you. Because if you're drawing the money, if you're showing up on time, if you're working your matches, promoters usually will put up with a lot of shit from a wrestler. They'll put up with a lot of shit. Look at Ric Flair. He would be hungover, drunk off his ass, whatever, but when he went out to the ring, he was ready to work. And he put on banger matches with a lot of big name stars. And he made a lot of big name stars in the process. So that's why people put up with a lot of Ric Flair's bullshit. If Ric Flair wasn't great in the ring, he got kicked to the curb a long time ago. He goes to Alabama and wrestles as Chris Von Colt with a Nazi gimmick. He knew it was the most offensive thing he could do to get heat. Nazis were big in the 50s and 60s to get all the heat because they were the heels, and it was after World War II. But in 1987, he was being a Nazi just to piss people off. He was desperate to get heat. Chris Colt started doing cocaine and later switched to crystal meth. Many say that's where the desperation and final downward spiral came from. Now, minus the cocaine and the crystal meth, minus all that, the part where he was being a Nazi just to piss people off, that kind of reminds me of Gator Ricky Ross a little bit. That's why I'm surprised Gator didn't want to take part in this. Because that's usually what Gator's problem is when he sometimes tries to get heat at wrestling shows or when he would do certain things on the podcast that would offend the co-hosts or offend the listeners or go too far. He'd be like, well, Mr. Bucciarelli, I have to get my heat. And it's like, Gator, first of all, you don't need to get heat on a fucking podcast. Second of all, you're pissing people off just to piss people off. That doesn't work. See, I've said things that have pissed people off. I get under people's skin. But I don't do it just to piss people off. I do it by stating facts or being comedic. Now, if me telling the truth or me telling a joke happens to piss you off, that's your fucking problem, not mine. I'm not actively trying to piss you off. I'm just keeping it real, which happens to piss people off because people don't like the truth in 2024. It's painful. By the late 1980s, Chris Colt's wrestling career dries up, due in part to his mounting substance abuse issues. After alienating most of his friends and allies, he fades into obscurity. With his wrestling career over and no other way to make an income, he starts busting drug houses. Now in his book he says, I would go on 6-7 days up. By the way, now I'm addicted to crystal meth, speed. Not like the cocaine a few years ago. I'm clean from coke. I just switched drugs to a more dangerous one. So by this point, he's off cocaine. He's clean from cocaine. He's just now on crystal meth. One where you require no sleep, no food. I'm in a dope house in Hollywood in the Silver Lake area, one of the biggest houses around. It took me 4 buys just to get in. I walk in confident and place my order for an 8-ball. As soon as the dealer shows me, I flash my badge so fast they don't check it and say, "You're all under arrest. I work for LAPD undercover." I tell them the house is surrounded by police cars. I catch them off guard, take the dope, and run. So that's what he meant by busting drug houses. He wouldn't steal their money, he would just steal their drugs so he could get high and get his fix. As far as what he was doing for money, God only fucking knows at this point, because his wrestling career ended. For years, nobody knew what happened to him until he started making adult films. He wanted to make money, but also wanted to show that he is not ashamed of who he is. So there was a uncut pro wrestler porn video that he was in, or wrestling video he was in, and then there's a scene of him going, "I'm back, I'm in shape, I'm gonna run you out of town, and then I'll fuck you." So that's what he started to do. He got into adult films and became a gay porn star, but also wanted to show that he's not ashamed of being gay. So now he's kind of letting the world in on the fact that he's gay and that there's no shame in it. He's proud to be gay. There's nothing wrong with being gay. And he's right. There is nothing wrong with being gay. If that's who you are, be you. Be proud of who you are. There's nothing wrong with being gay. It was frowned upon back then. It's not today. And that's the way it should be. If you're a gay man, you just like to fuck dudes, or you're a lesbian, you like to fuck other women, that's fine. Live your life. As long as you're not hurting anybody, you're good. Be you. After disappearing from the wrestling scene in the mid-'80s, Chris Colt resurrects himself as an adult film star, shocking many from his past. He worked with Jack Fritcher, who he knew from Drummer Magazine and the Palm Drive video movies, which their tagline was, "Masculine videos for men who like men masculine." That's what Palm Drive was all about. Chris contacted him about shooting a video when he saw the Bavarian brothers portrayed as wrestlers in a Drummer article and on the cover. So he figured, oh, he must be a wrestling fan, so maybe I can take my wrestling persona, parlay it into the gay film world, and make something happen. Now, Palm Drive was a source of entertainment for gay men during the 1980s. Their main focus was solo videos, like POVs or, jerking off or touching yourself. Like, those are solo videos. One man talking to the audience before he fucks someone. That's another solo video. You see a lot of those even in the straight porn. He didn't have a script. He just went off. He used the energy he brought to the ring on camera to make the viewer come. He'd be like, "Another victory. One more time somebody goes down, and they're going to go down on me." That's literally a quote from Chris Colt. Professional wrestling has always been a form of softcore porn for gay men. So this is a perfect transition for Chris because he saw himself as a fetish object. Now, as much as the wrestling fan in me fucking hates hearing that, because for years people have said, oh, wrestling is gay and all the reasons why wrestling's gay, and I've been in so many fights with people over this shit, I have to kind of agree. Just because wrestling itself is not gay doesn't mean that gay men don't still find it attractive and want to jerk off to it. That's a fact. Like, it's not designed to be gay porn for men, but men still find wrestlers attractive and want to jerk off. In fact, in one scene in the video, Chris Colt says, "I ran Hulk Hogan out of New York City. He was scared to sign a match with me because I'd take his belt and slap his ass with it." Now, this promo worked because Hulk Hogan was a god to the gay community. Most of those gay fans would go to see him at the Cow Palace. They would go to the Cow Palace and see Hulk Hogan. So Hogan had a very big gay fan base, whether he realized it or not. A lot of gay men loved Hulk Hogan. Almost 10 years after his wrestling career was over, Chris Colt's wild and chaotic life quietly comes to an end. Some say he was found in a back alley in Seattle. Others say he was found in a chair with a needle in his arm. Wikipedia says he was found in a homeless shelter and he died due to complications from AIDS. So nobody knows what happened to him. They just hear different stories from different people. Because that's the thing about Chris Colt. He was such a mystery that it was hard to believe which story was true about him and which one wasn't. Now, the official death certificate of Charles Fay Harris, again, the shoot name or Christian name of Chris Colt, dated May 23rd, 1995. Ironically, 4 years to the day before the tragic death of Owen. and it lists HIV as a factor in his death. No autopsy is performed. His listed occupation was professional wrestler. He wanted to die at 27. He ended up dying at 49, which in a way is still kind of young, but not as young as he wanted to. So he was able to outlive a lot of people that he knew that died. And it's a shame. HIV, AIDS, in the 80s, that's when it really started to ramp up. And obviously, as promiscuous as he was, it doesn't surprise me that he would have got it. It's not just the fact that he's gay, it's the fact that he was obviously very promiscuous as well. Now, obviously, whether you're gay or straight, being promiscuous will get you HIV and AIDS if you're not careful. It doesn't just happen to gay people. But because gay men were more promiscuous than straight men, AIDS was more prominent in the gay community. He was the first to do many things and was decades ahead of his time as far as taking bumps, getting heat, working matches, and cutting promos. He did the flying elbow long before Randy Savage and was a rock and roll wrestler before Cyndi Lauper and Hulk Hogan ushered in the rock and wrestling connection, which defined the 80s as we all know. So he was an innovator of a lot of moves. Chris is more than just a drug addict and a homosexual. He was an incredible wrestler who sadly used drugs and alcohol to cope with the homophobia he dealt with. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of people do. A lot of people use drugs and alcohol to cope with, the problems in their lives. He dealt with a lot of homophobia. That's how he coped with it. Some people were abused. That's how they cope with it. There's a lot of things that people use drugs and alcohol to cope. Me, I use fast food and soda. That's my coping mechanisms. But like I said, it was obviously he grew up in a different time period, but nobody deserved to go through that. Here's the thing. I don't care if you're gay or straight. If you're a good, decent human being, that's all that matters. And if you're a gay man that's just living his life, you're not bothering anybody, you're not hurting anybody, you're a good person with a good heart, you just happen to be a guy who prefers to suck and fuck other guys, then you shouldn't be made to be ashamed for who you are. And you shouldn't have to deal with homophobia like that. Like I said, as long as you're not hurting anybody, you don't deserve to be judged. And neither did Chris. Like, obviously, there were things that he did that warranted some of the stuff he went through, but he never deserved to go through it because he was gay. It's because of the content of his character during odd times in his life. And according to a letter Chris sent to his friend, in 1991 was when he stopped drinking and drugging and became clean and sober. So he was able to get sober before he ultimately died. And obviously, as I mentioned before, that's Chris Colt's legacy. One of the craziest, insane people in the history of the business. Also an innovator ahead of his time, ushered in a rock and roll era. And he was the best wrestler nobody got to see because he was his own worst enemy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will conclude this review of Boochcast Reviews Darkside of the Ring. I thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you guys tune in next week. I'll be riding solo again because apparently no one wants to fuck with this one either. But we've got Chris Adams, the Gentleman and the Demon, next week here on the Boochcast. So make sure you can follow us on all of our podcast platforms. The link is down in the description box below. Follow us on our social media platforms. The link is down in the description box below. And of course, you guys can support the Boochcast by going to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/the Boochcast/support. That link is down in the description box below. And of course, as always, hit the subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified so you never miss another episode of Boochcast Reviews Darkside of the Ring, as well as other additional Boochcast YouTube content. Talk to you guys next time. Until then, pizza, baby!